Good morning and welcome to this week's episode of Crafting Christians. Today I want to take a look at what's in our spiritual toolbox, what that is and what we should have there. As part of our creating, crafting, building, making, we have to have certain tools in a toolbox. We buy the supplies, we splurge, getting the things that we need, but we also carve out time to do those activities. So what about our spiritual relationship with God? Do we have the right tools, and do we carve out time to spend time with God using those tools? What creates calm for you when you are not crafting, when you're not involved in your hobby? What spiritual tools do you use to create that time and space in preparation for spending time with God? And then what tools do you use in those times and places when life is difficult that connect you to God? So what are our spiritual tools? Those things that help us grow spiritually, personally, in our relationship with God. Those tools, those things that connect us to God, those moments, activities in which we truly know that God is near, such as prayer walking, or getting out in nature and seeing the beauty of the fall, or the spring, or the winter, looking for the beauty and all that. We have to have the right tool for the job. When I had a Jeep, I had to have a lot of specialty tools, such as a 36 millimeter socket for certain axle bolts. Other specialty tools might be paper folder that helps you make the creases for journaling, for crafting, card making, whatever it might be. The right scissors for paper, for material. There are all kinds of specialty material scissors as well. I have cheap tools in my workshop for woodworking because that's all I could afford at the time. It's just a hobby, just a practice. But when it comes to our spiritual toolbox, we want to fill them with good, high quality tools that we can use. So more than just having the tools, we have to know how to use those tools to connect us to God as well. So do we have a wrench that tightens our thoughts when our thoughts are wandering away from God, when we're thinking or feeling inadequate, unworthy, even insignificant? Do we have the spiritual screwdrivers that tighten down the reins on our anger or on our tongue, the words that we say? Do we have the spiritual hammer that reminds us not that God hits us over the head, but that work is required to be spiritually connected to God? Do we have that spiritual oilcloth? Always got to have rags and cloths and stuff for cleanup, for cleaning up glue, for wiping things down, dusting things off. Do we have spiritual cloths for wiping away our tears? As we journey through life towards heaven, we will come across situations where we need certain tools, and sometimes the right tool. So what's in our spiritual toolbox? The things that God has given us: grace, mercy, forgiveness, love, reminding us that we are His children, called into His presence, called to be part of the kingdom. We got the whole armor of God that Paul writes about in Ephesians 6. I think that's right. We have prayer and listening and the Bible. Those are the basics of our faith. We can always go to those, spending time praying about the situation, about whatever's taking place. We can go to the scriptures and look for guidance and direction. We can go to scriptures and look for hope and encouragement. We can go to the scripture and look for that which we need. Wise counsel. Do we have someone in our life that we can go to and seek wise counsel from them as a person of faith? What about trusting in the Lord and faith in God? Do we have those tools in our toolbox? Are we developing the skill to use faith and hope and even God's grace? Do we have spiritual gifts in ourselves or in others around us, such as teaching, ministry, exhortation? I have a friend who listens to sermons on a regular basis each and every day, sometimes one, sometimes three, sometimes 5 or 6 sermons a day to keep him connected and focused. What about forgiveness and kindness and compassion as part of our spiritual toolbox? Things like creativity, gratitude practices, giving thanks, We're on the verge of November 1st, and Thanksgiving is around the corner. Do we practice gratitude, thanksgiving, praise of God as part of our spiritual practices and developments? Speaking of spiritual practices and developments, I highly recommend Richard Foster, Celebration of Discipline. Things like meditation, prayer, fasting, and study, we've already talked about, but what about things like simplicity, solitude, submission, and service to God, for others? What about confession and worship? Worship is a great spiritual tool and practice if we will take the time to do so. On Sunday morning, gathering together with other believers, as well as in our day-to-day life. Do we take a few moments each day and worship in the midst of today being Tuesday? Or what about Friday evening? Do we spend time worshiping? We must always have our spiritual toolbox handy, ready to open and repair and use the tools for ourselves, but also for others. Those spiritual tools are given to us to share as well, to help others along the journey. So how can we use the spiritual tools that we have and use in our life to help someone else develop their relationship and connections with God? Having tools is one thing, using them is something different. Knowing how to use them, when to use them, is even more. So do you know how to use your spiritual tools for yourself and for others? Spend some time pondering these things, practicing, developing, using, and exercising the skills, the tools in your own life so that you can help someone else. And may God's blessing be upon you. And amen.